Redemption didn't begin with miracles, it began with quiet courage. Parshat Shemot opens in darkness, not because God is absent, but because redemption rarely announces itself. The children of Israel enter Egypt as a family, welcomed and protected. They leave their names behind in the Torah's opening verses, and soon after they lose their individuality as well. A new Pharaoh arises, not merely a new king, but a new worldview, one that sees growth as threat and difference as danger. Egypt does not enslave Israel overnight. First comes fear, then policy, then forced labor, and finally cruelty disguised as necessity. The Torah shows us something unsettling. Evil doesn't begin with violence, it begins with justification. Pharaoh convinces himself that he must act wisely, that oppression is strategic, that fear makes cruelty reasonable, and yet the more Israel is afflicted, the more they grow. Because when a people are connected to something eternal, pressure does not erase them, it reveals them. Pharaoh's plan escalates. When labor fails to break the spirit, he turns to erasure. Midwives are commanded to kill. They refuse, quietly, without speeches or rebellion, and the Torah pauses to name them. Because history is shaped not only by kings, but by those who fear God more than power. When that too fails, Pharaoh casts all Hebrew boys into the Nile. Water, the source of life, becomes a weapon of death. And into that water a child is placed, not thrown, but entrusted. Moshe is not born into leadership, he is born into concealment. His mother hides him as long as she can, then does something impossible. She lets go, believing that God's plan is larger than her arms can hold. Pharaoh's own daughter draws Moshe from the water. The house that decreed death now raises the Redeemer. Because tyranny often carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. Moshe grows up torn between worlds, Egyptian in appearance, Hebrew in soul, and one day he sees what he can no longer ignore. He sees a man beaten, humiliated, erased, and Moshe acts. It is not yet leadership, it is not yet prophecy, it is moral awakening. But redemption is not immediate. Moshe flees, he saves others again, this time strangers, and disappears into Midian. Years pass, he becomes a shepherd, learning patience, responsibility, and how to lead lives that cannot speak for themselves. Only then does God appear, not in a palace, not in Egypt, but in a burning bush that is not consumed. Because Jewish survival has never been about invincibility, it is about endurance. God tells Moshe that he has heard the cries of his people, not because they were loud, but because suffering eventually reaches heaven. Moshe resists the mission, he questions himself, he questions the people, he questions whether redemption can even be accepted, and God responds with words that echo through Jewish history. I will be with you. Not a promise of ease, not a promise of speed, but a promise of presence. Parsha Shemot ends before miracles, before plagues, before freedom. It ends with a people still enslaved and a leader just beginning to believe. Because redemption does not begin when chains fall, it begins when someone is willing to see suffering, refuse indifference, and say this is not the way the world is meant to be. And that is how Jewish history always begins again. What part of Parsha Shemot speaks to you most? Ask your questions in the comments. They'll shape future videos.